In the heart of the Palouse, a vast and rolling agricultural region of the inland Northwest, lies the city of Moscow, Idaho. It is, by every measure, a quintessential American college town. Life here revolves around the University of Idaho, a place that draws thousands of young people from across the country, all seeking education, friendship, and the promise of a future they can build for themselves. Moscow is known for its close-knit community, its low crime rate, and a pervasive sense of safety that allows students to feel worlds away from the dangers of a larger city. It's a place where doors are often left unlocked, and the greatest anxieties tend to center on final exams and homecoming games. At the edge of this campus, on a street named King Road, stood a large, three-story rental home, a common sight in any college town. It wasn't just a structure of wood and siding, it was a home filled with the energy and aspirations of 5 young women who lived there. Among them were 2 best friends who were, by all accounts, inseparable. 21-year-old Madison Mogan, known as Maddie, was a senior majoring in marketing. Friends and family described her as compassionate, funny, and happy-go-lucky. Her constant companion was 21-year-old Kaylee Gonzalez, a senior studying general studies, who was seen as strong-willed and exceptionally driven. Their friendship was the kind forged in childhood, having started in the 6th grade and grown into a bond so deep they were more like sisters. Kaylee's family even considered Maddie their bonus child. The two planned their lives together, and Kaylee already had a job lined up in Austin, Texas after graduation, but ultimately wanted to live wherever her best friend Maddie ended up. Also in the house was 20-year-old Xana Kernadol, a junior and a fellow marketing major, described as an exceptionally focused student. Xana had found love with her boyfriend, 20-year-old Ethan Chapin, who was a frequent guest at the house. Ethan was a triplet, attending the university alongside his brother and sister, and was majoring in recreation, sport, and tourism management. Friends saw them as the perfect pair, sharing an unstoppable, loving relationship. The 2 remaining roommates, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funke, completed the household. They were all living a familiar college life, juggling classes, work, and friendships, completely unaware that this fragile piece was about to be shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. The night of Saturday, November 12th, unfolded with the familiar rhythm of a weekend in Moscow. For the residents of the King Road house, it was a time for friends and socializing, an ordinary evening with no hint of the darkness that was to come. Maddie Mogan and Kaylee Gonzalez, the inseparable duo, headed out to the Corner Club, a popular downtown sports bar and a staple of the university's social scene. They were seen on video footage at the bar between 10 p.m. and 1:30 a.m. Meanwhile, Xana Kernodal and her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, made their way to the Sigma Chi fraternity house on campus, where Ethan was a member. The 2 other roommates, Dylan and Bethany, were also out in town that night. They later recalled seeing Xana and Ethan at the fraternity house around 9 p.m., a simple crossing of paths that would later become a critical point in the timeline. As the bars prepared for last call, the night began to wind down. For Maddie and Kaylee, the evening wasn't quite over. At about 1:40 a.m., they were captured on a public live stream from a local food truck called the Grub Truck. The video, broadcast on the gaming platform Twitch, showed them ordering food, chatting with other students, their faces illuminated by the bright lights of the truck. It is a hauntingly normal final image, a brief, unvarnished moment of 2 best friends simply ending their night. They secured a ride from a private individual and arrived back at their King Road home at approximately 1:56 a.m. Xana and Ethan returned around this same time, while Dylan and Bethany had already been home for nearly an hour, having gotten back at 1 a.m. The house, now full, settled into the deep quiet of the early morning hours. A few hours passed. Then, at approximately 4 a.m., a final, mundane interaction with the outside world occurred. A DoorDash driver delivered an order for Xana, leaving it on the porch as requested. It was the last recorded event at the house before the timeline turned from one of documented moments to one of terror. Inside the walls of 1122 King Road, the night deepened. On the first floor, Bethany Funke was asleep in her bedroom. On the second floor, Dylan Mortensen was in her own room on the southeast side of the house when she was awakened by sounds coming from the floor above. She later told investigators she thought it was Kaylee playing with her dog, Murphy. A short time later, she heard what she believed was Kaylee's voice say something to the effect of, "There's someone here." The statement hung in the air, a detail that could have been misinterpreted. Dylan, disturbed by the noises, opened her bedroom door. She peered into the hallway, but saw nothing. A short while later, another sound reached her, one that was unmistakable. She thought she heard crying coming from Xana's room. At that point, she heard a male voice say something reassuring, something like, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." This prompted her to open her door a third time. What she saw then would become the only eyewitness account of the killer. A figure in black clothing and a mask that covered his mouth and nose was walking toward her. He was tall, 5'10" or more, not muscular but athletically built, and his bushy eyebrows were visible above the mask. She stood, as she described it, frozen in shock. The man did not acknowledge her. He simply walked past her, heading toward the backsliding glass door. In that moment of terror, Dylan retreated into her room and locked the door. This was the moment investigators believed the killer left the scene, leaving behind a silence that would last for nearly 8 more hours. As morning broke over Moscow, the house on King Road remained silent. For hours, the horrific events of the night were contained within its walls. It wasn't until nearly noon that the surviving roommates, Dylan and Bethany, grew concerned. Believing that one of their roommates on the second floor had passed out and wasn't waking up, they called friends over to the house. The confusion and uncertainty culminated at 11:58 a.m. when a 911 call was placed from one of the roommates' phones, requesting help for an unconscious person. The almost 8-hour delay between the time of the attack and the call for help would become an immediate source of public confusion and speculation.
When arriving officers arrived and entered the home, they were confronted with a scene of unimaginable violence. At approximately 4 p.m., Sergeant Blaker from the Moscow Police Department began to process the crime scene. He noted immediately that there was no sign of forced entry. The killer had either been let in or, more likely, found an unlocked door. He started his walkthrough on the bottom floor and moved to the second. There, in a hallway leading to Xana Kernodle's bedroom, he made his first grim discovery. Xana's body was on the floor, and Ethan Chapin was also deceased in the room. Both had suffered wounds caused by a sharp-edged weapon. Sergeant Blaker then made his way to the third floor. In Kaylee's bedroom, officers found her dog, Murphy, that she shared with her ex-boyfriend, unharmed. Then they entered Maddie's room. Both she and Kaylee were deceased from visible stab wounds, together in the same bed. But amid the devastation, the killer had made a critical error. Lying on the bed next to Madison Mogan was a tan leather knife sheath, stamped with the insignia of Kabar and the United States Marine Corps. It was the first solid piece of evidence. Near the door of Dylan's room on the second floor, they found another, a latent shoe print with a diamond-shaped pattern, consistent with the sole of a Vans shoe, and a silent corroboration of the path the killer had walked. In the immediate aftermath, the investigation was hampered by a lack of clear leads and mounting public pressure.
The Moscow Police Department initially stated they believed the attack was isolated and targeted, an attempt to quell the rising fear in the community. However, they soon backtracked, admitting it was a miscommunication and they couldn't be certain if the house or any of the victims had been specifically chosen. They later clarified their position once more, concluding that the attack was likely targeted since there were no signs of forced entry and 2 of the roommates had been left unharmed. But with no suspect and no murder weapon, investigators turned to the silent witnesses of the digital age, surveillance cameras. They began the massive task of collecting and reviewing video footage from residential homes and businesses in the area surrounding King Road, focusing on the critical window between 3 and 6 a.m. on the morning of November 13th. Given the location and the late hour, very few vehicles typically pass through this part of town. This scarcity of traffic made one particular car stand out. Investigators began to notice a white sedan appearing in the footage. It wasn't just seen once. It was observed passing by the King Road home multiple times, starting its approach at 3:29 a.m. and circling the area for nearly an hour. The car's repeated presence suggested a chilling possibility, that the driver was not a random passerby, but someone surveying the location, perhaps waiting for the right moment. Then, at 4:20 a.m., just moments after the estimated time of the murders, the same white sedan was captured leaving the area at a high rate of speed. Critically, the vehicle did not have a front license plate, a detail that would complicate its identification. Based on the roads it traveled, police believe the driver was heading toward Pullman, Washington, a town just 10 miles away and home to Washington State University. The footage was sent to a forensic examiner who determined the vehicle was a 2011 to 2016 model Hyundai Elantra. The search for the killer now had a new focus, finding this ghost on the road. The search for the white Hyundai Elantra led investigators just 10 miles across the state line to Pullman, Washington. On November 25, 2022, law enforcement agencies in the area were officially asked to be on the lookout for the vehicle. 4 days later, on November 29, that request yielded a breakthrough. A Washington State University police officer, Daniel Tiengo, meticulously combed through the university's database of registered vehicles. He found a 2015 white Elantra with Pennsylvania license plates, registered to a graduate student named Brian Koberger. Koberger lived in an apartment in Pullman, approximately 3/4 of a mile from where the last surveillance camera had captured the suspect vehicle. Later that same day, another WSU officer, Curtis Whitman, located the car in the parking lot of Koberger's apartment complex. He ran the plates, which came back to Brian Koberger, though he now had a Washington license plate which he had received on November 18th, just 5 days after the murders. As investigators began to dig into Koberger's background, an unsettling profile emerged. He was a 28-year-old PhD student in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology at WSU.
His academic history showed a deep and focused interest in the mindset of criminals. He held an undergraduate degree in psychology and cloud-based forensics. Only months before the murders, in the fall of 2022, he had applied for an internship with the Pullman Police Department, writing in an essay about his desire to assist rural law enforcement agencies with the collection and analysis of technological data. He had also posted a survey on the website Reddit, asking former offenders to provide information to help him understand how emotions and psychological traits influence decision-making when committing a crime. People who knew him offered conflicting descriptions. A classmate described him as comfortable and talkative, but noted he seemed tired and disheveled after the murders. Acquaintances from high school remembered him as an overweight and bullied kid who underwent a drastic transformation his senior year, losing over 100 pounds and becoming more aggressive, even developing a heroin addiction before getting sober and dedicating himself to his criminology studies. The man behind the wheel of the white Elantra was a student of crime itself. With a primary suspect identified, investigators turned to the digital footprint they believed Brian Koberger had left behind. They obtained search warrants to analyze which cell phones had utilized the cell towers in the immediate vicinity of the King Road house between 3 and 5 a.m. on the morning of the murders. Koberger's phone did not appear in that data. The absence was, in itself, a clue. It suggested a degree of forensic awareness, that the killer had likely turned off their phone or left it elsewhere to avoid detection during the commission of the crime. However, criminals who survey a location beforehand often don't take the same precautions, believing they are not yet committing an offense. With this theory in mind, investigators expanded their search. On December 23, 2022, they were granted a warrant for Koberger's historical cell phone records going back months. It showed that on the night of the murders, Koberger's phone left his apartment complex in Pullman at 2:47 a.m. and began moving in a path consistent with the movements of the white Elantra seen on video. Almost immediately after leaving, the phone stopped reporting to the network, effectively going dark. It did not reappear on the network until 4:48 a.m., at which point it was utilizing cell towers south of Moscow, near Blaine, Idaho, before traveling back toward his apartment, reconnecting with the local network at 5:27 a.m. The 2-hour gap of silence perfectly aligned with the time frame of the attack. Furthermore, the records showed his phone had been in the area of the King Road home on at least 12 separate occasions before the night of the murders.
All but one of these instances occurred in the late evening and early morning hours, painting a chilling picture of a potential stalker methodically surveilling his targets. His digital ghost was now taking on a very solid form. His phone even pinged in the location of the King Road house later that same day, between 9:12 and 9:21 a.m., just hours before the victims were discovered. Following his arrest, Bryan Kohberger agreed to be extradited from Pennsylvania and was flown back to Idaho to face the charges. On January 5th, he made his first court appearance in Moscow, stepping into a packed courtroom filled with the families of the victims he was accused of murdering. As he stood before the judge, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit, Kaylee's parents sat in the front row, staring him down. He avoided making eye contact. As the judge read the 4 counts of first-degree murder, stating that each victim was stabbed and murdered with premeditation with malice and forethought, family members were overcome with grief, the clinical language of the law a brutal confirmation of their loss. While Kohberger sat in a jail cell at the Latah County Jail, investigators worked to connect the final, unsettling dots of his life before the murders. It was discovered he had a now-deleted Instagram account that at once followed Maddie, Kaylee, and Xana, though none of them had followed him back. In late October, just weeks before the attack, he had sent a direct message to one of the victims. When he received no response, he sent several more messages. It's unclear if the victim ever saw them. Furthermore, it was revealed he had eaten at the Mad Greek restaurant in Moscow, where both Maddie and Xana worked as servers. A former employee recalled his visits, noting he had ordered vegan pizza and was particular about ensuring his food hadn't touched animal products. In court, Kohberger waived his right to a speedy preliminary hearing, and his case was assigned to public defender Ann Taylor, a development that raised concerns as she had previously represented the mothers of both Xana Carnado and Madison Mogen. The community of Moscow, though relieved by the arrest, now faced the long and painful road of legal proceedings. The house on King Road, once a place of so much life, stood empty behind police tape, a silent monument to the tragedy. It was eventually demolished, a physical attempt to erase a scar on the community, but the memory of Ethan, Xana, Madison, and Kaylee, and the night a stranger brought a nightmare to their quiet college town, remains forever. Bryan Kohberger was finally sentenced to 4 life terms in prison without the possibility of parole in July 2025 after he pleaded guilty to the Idaho murders that spared him from the death penalty. Do you guys think judgment was rightly served in this case? 4 lives lost so the one that took them can die in prison, or he should have been given the death penalty outrightly? Let me know your opinions in the comments. Thank you for watching. I will be seeing you on our next video.